All right, welcome everybody to the Sprint Jump Throw Performance Podcast. I'm Joel Reinhardt along with Andrew Cormier. Very lucky today to have on the show Eric Donoval. He is the Director of Sports Performance for Wyoming football. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate the time, Joel and Andrew. Excited to have a conversation with you guys. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll hop right into the first question. So one thing that we've actually stolen after kind of seeing you do it and mull it around and realize it worked for our situation was the standing triple jump and how much you like implementing that specifically with skill guys. But maybe, I know you probably had that at LSU as well in past stops, but like what about that specifically draws you to it? And what do you see that you're getting out of that and any sort of correlations you're drawing from that specific movement?
Yeah, so I got to give credit to Joel Smith on that one. He talks a lot about that in his book Speed Strength. And there's obviously a progression that goes into getting to the standing triple jump. We're obviously going to do different variations of the broad jump, whether it be with pauses or consecutive. We want to make sure they're strong in a unilateral fashion before we kind of blend the two into that movement. But I just think it's a great movement that mimics the qualities of acceleration. You're going to get a dynamic, bilateral jump to start. And then anytime you can put force in the ground and project your hips in a unilateral fashion, it's obviously going to transfer over to acceleration really well. Kind of the angles that you see in the transition of acceleration and the elastic qualities are going to transfer really well. What's really been cool is to see the intent that has been driven through actually putting markers out and actually recording the distance that these guys have reached. The farthest marker we use, and we kind of call it the blue cone, I believe it's 32 feet, which is just slightly past 10 yards. First time we did it, which was last summer, I think we had 4 or 5 guys that could reach that blue cone, and we're up to 10 or 12 now. So anytime you can improve a movement like that, the transfer over to the skill of acceleration is going to be pretty high. And they get competitive with it. So it's been a really good movement that we utilize on our acceleration days, which are Monday. It's been a great movement for us to utilize, but I do have to give a shout to Joel Smith for that one.
Yeah, for sure. We're actually recording with him on Sunday. So
awesome.
We can let him know. Do you find any sort of, like when you first started implementing that, or when new guys come in and they first get exposed to it, even though there's a progression leading up to it, do you find just from like a coordination versus output standpoint, like, or maybe outputs, how do you, I guess, as you're watching guys, distinguish between this kid's getting better because the outputs are getting better, or maybe he's just getting more coordinated in that specific movement? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the biggest thing is the coordination. The biggest challenge when you're implementing that movement initially is their confidence out of that initial broad jump because they are landing on one leg. So it's really a coordination and confidence thing. You'll see guys when they first do that movement, they kind of just hop into that first single jump, which is obviously going to throw the distance off completely because you're going to get a ton of distance off that first initial broad jump. So the confidence and the coordination is really what's improving. Now, I have to think that there's some kind of mechanical improvement as well. But a lot of it's going to be the orientation of the limbs and the coordination and where their foot strike is, their projection angle, and their confidence off that first initial broad jump to get into and land on that single leg to get into the next jump.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not even necessarily like, one's good and one's bad. It's like, because that coordination might even be more valuable, moving over into like true, just like on-field athletic movement. Just the ability to like organize yourselves. I mean, we have a true freshman D end who came in, who's like one of those like typical coming in from high school, super skinny D ends. So it's like, all right, he's a weight room project, but he triple jumped in high school. And just watching the way he moves and organizes his body, it's like it's farther along than a typical wiry kid you see at that kind of development stage. And I was like, what'd you do in high school? He's like, triple jumped. And I was like, all right,
yep. Yeah, that That makes sense then. Yeah,
for
and
sure.
we try to not over cue it.
Hmm.
And like you said, they got to kind of self-organize. There's some broad coaching cues that we really emphasize. The projection angle, where their foot strike should be, a low heel recovery through those single jumps. But other than that, they do kind of self-organize themselves once they have the confidence to land on that single leg.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that too because we started implementing them. We progressed to them, and then we ended up getting to them late spring, and it was gonna keep progressing in the summer. That obviously got tweaked. Um, but yeah, even like from the first time we implemented it, like the first time they jumped to the second time they jumped to the third time they jumped, it was just guys being like, "Oh, like I can handle this." You could tell
Yeah,
like almost a little bit of just like what's the word I'm looking for? Like hesitancy of like,
yep,
hey, you'll be able to handle it. Like you can
right.
really drive.
Right.
It was cool
And
to
you
see.
know, another thing that has really transferred to the standing triple jump, and I don't want to get too far ahead of the conversation. We started implementing a lot of single leg bounding on our top speed days, and we started with a really slow progression with that. But once they got confident with the single leg bounding, we saw the standing triple jump start to improve as well. So there's a transfer from those plyometrics we do on our top speed day over to the standing triple jump as well.
Yeah.
It almost seems, I mean, you say there's a progression. It seems like it's probably a very simple process of just building on very simple exercises and getting them very comfortable with being able to do it. I mean, I know we've talked about it probably a couple of times now in our past episodes of just like having the exercises simple enough where the highest outputs could eventually be put out. But now
Mm-hmm.
it's just we're providing them with these exercises that we know will get to that closer to end goal of the triple jump or single leg bounding like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, in our program, we'll take Mondays for example. I like to do all or the majority of my bilateral plyos on the field in the morning, and I'll do a lot of my unilateral plyos as acceleration complexes in the weight room in the afternoon. And so it's taking really simple progressions like broad jumps with a stick and pause, moving to broad jumps consecutive, moving to longer broad jump consecutive, and then moving from split jumps to scissor jumps to single leg cycle jumps in the weight room. And so you can progress the bilateral part of it concurrently as you progress the unilateral part of it, and then you kind of marry the two together for that final product of the standing triple jump.
That's awesome. I mean,
Yeah, that's
looking
great.
at other go-to measurables, I mean, do you guys measure, are you doing like a specific distance or whatever it is with the single leg broad as well?
No,
the bound, sorry.
So for the single leg bounding,
Yeah.
no, that was, you know, really the emphasis of that was getting them comfortable on one leg. And we started very slow with just a small jog up. At first, the emphasis was not horizontal displacement. It was getting enough vertical displacement that they could cycle their legs. So it actually turned into single leg hopping almost. As they got more comfortable with it, we challenged them with some horizontal displacement to see how far they could get. So the next progression, obviously, this was the first summer that we really started hitting the single leg bounding. The next progression would be to touch on that in spring and then progress it into, you know, maybe a measurable distance the following summer. But again, with the plyos, you know, I like to slow cook them on it, you know, and like you said, I don't want to make it too complex where the output drops. And so for those single leg bounds, I just wanted vertical displacement. I wanted a good single leg cycle, and I just didn't want to see collapse at the hip. And that was kind of the first progression of what we did with the single leg bounding.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do any plyos based in any other dimension that are measured? I mean, I'm sure you might do like a skater hop type of deal that some people do laterally. Do you, or have you even thought of doing measurables within a different direction almost?
We haven't yet. The main measurable we do is broad jumps and then the standing triple jumps. And that's essentially giving them markers. You know, if they get to the red cone, I need them to get to the yellow cone eventually, or want to progress the cones. But in terms of like a frontal plane plyo, we haven't done any measurables with that yet.
Cool. Gotcha. So you alluded to it briefly, kind of like the, you know, recording, and I don't know if you fully go like record, rank, publish, you know, kind of the holler stuff, but adding those measurables increases output just from a competition standpoint, what are some other ways you fit in that model into some other aspects of the program?
Yeah, we do publish a lot. I just tend to not do it as much on social media, so people don't see it as much. But
Yeah.
anytime we do the standing triple jumps, whatever cone they hit, flying tens, the speed that they've hit, whatever measurable we're measuring, we post it in the weight room. We put it on our TV, and we either celebrate or expose people. And we don't hide anything from the athletes, and we don't hide any performance of one athlete from another athlete. So we do like to publish a lot of that stuff within our building. And that does drive competition, that drives intent. That's been huge for us, and the guys enjoy it because, if they hit a good flying 10, we had a couple guys hit a 0.89 this summer. That should be celebrated. And in this kind of generation that we're living in right now, that kind of just adds to the motivation and the intent. They want to see their goals and everything that they've accomplished posted and out there for everyone to see. So they enjoy that. They like that a lot.
Yeah. And even on the other end, it never hurts to know the truth.
Exactly. And if you didn't hit a good speed, that's going to be posted as well. And you can respond to that however you want to respond to that. Hopefully it's in a positive way. But we don't hide anything.
Do you feel like there's any negative to doing that style of like record, rank, publish? I mean, I've heard some people talk about like if form is terrible, but like obviously you take your time setting people up for like being able to handle what you're asking them to do. Do you see that there's any other possible negative to doing that essentially?
I don't really see a negative to it. If somebody doesn't hit a speed they like or a distance they like, that's a great opportunity for them to respond the right way. And that's a great invitation for us to, hammer home how important it is to respond to things, whether it was from a coordination standpoint, not being good enough at the drill, or just not being athletically good enough to do it yet. Those guys need to respond the right way, and they need to do the drill better. They need to take coaching. They need to try harder, whatever it is. That's a great learning opportunity for them to respond correctly. And then on the flip side, how these guys deal with success is just as important as how they deal with failure. Those guys that ran 0.89s, do you think you're just fast enough and just can shut it down, or are you going to continue to strive and try to get faster? So I don't necessarily see a negative to it. At the end of the day, man, the world is going to reward action and not intent. And that's a lesson that a lot of kids and young adults need to understand. You're not going to be coddled, and your results are going to be out there. It's not going to be hidden from people. I mean, that just kind of is what it is. So they need to learn how to respond the right way too.
For sure.
Definitely.
I feel like even too with some of the weight room versus field stuff, like we've talked. One of our buddies works at Indiana, and he was with the Giants with Aaron Wallman. He said when they would throw the tendos out, they almost had to like hide it from the NFL guys because they would get so competitive that they would like intentionally have their form be bad to get faster speeds.
Yeah.
But I feel like with field work, it ends up not necessarily working that way. Like if I want to pull a trap bar heavier, I might do it with like super rounded back or whatever. But if I want to run a fly 10 faster, it's not going to come through intentionally like goofing my form essentially. So that ends up kind of regulating itself almost.
Absolutely. And, granted, there's a huge tax to sprinting, but there's just not a load on the body like there is in the weight room.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right. You want to run with bad form and inefficient form, your speeds are going to go down anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Are there, what are some of the go-tos that you guys use that kind of record, rank, publish with your big guys?
You just mentioned it. The Tendo units have been huge for us.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, there is that risk of losing form. We haven't had that problem yet. The Tendos have been absolutely huge for us. So it's not as much recording and publishing with the Tendos, but it's intra-workout competition between platforms and guys on platforms. So we don't necessarily publish that stuff. Now we record all of it and we keep track of speeds at different intensities and different weights, so we can have that for our records. But it really drives competition and intent on the platforms within the workout and within the workout group intra-workout, which has been huge for us. I mean, our team bench numbers have went up 30 pounds since we've gotten the Tendos, and I would attribute that to the intent that guys are putting into the bar. Not that they weren't lifting hard before, but I don't think you understand how to move weight truly fast unless you have an objective measurable to see. So those have been really good for us, especially for our offensive and defensive linemen.
Yeah, and even too, like just from like a team-wide culture standpoint, it's always refreshing if you have, instead of some O-line coach just asking you again, like, how many reps did he get at 225? Like, hey, how fast did he move 275 today? Like, that's it's a cool thing just from an overall building standpoint to have people start using that type of language.
Exactly. And it's, I'm not huge into, now the O&D line are different. They need to be, damn strong. They do for what they do. But I'm just getting away from absolute maxes. Like, I want to see, how fast you can move 405, or I want to see what was your 75% and what speed did we hit it at? Or if we have velocity ranges, what weight did you hit a 0.8 at? If that number improved, I mean, the power output improved 100%. So I'm getting farther and farther away from truly maxing squats. Now we go heavy, during certain weeks and times of the cycle, but I'm more worried about how fast are you moving sub-maximal weights and staying within intensity ranges that are going to actually produce the most power output.
Yeah, that was even something when I was at Holy Cross, we had Gym Aware, and that was something I was debating playing around with, especially like men's lacrosse was my most contact sport essentially that I worked with. And it was like, how about when we max, it's now like, maybe how much can you move at 0.6 or whatever it is that we're going to use as our velocity. And if that goes up, that's a good sign. Also, there's the safety factor of usually in that position, it's like 1 to 45 guys in the weight room. So you don't have to chase guys down and just get pinned on squat and everything.
Exactly. And, we usually give them a cutoff for certain weights. If we're going to, for our quote unquote test week, we'll give them a cutoff of, whatever 0.3 or a 0.25. And you can estimate what their max would be pretty well based on the speed or the weight that they hit at that speed. But I'm with you, we try to track, what weights they hit and what speed, and then, what speeds were they at, later in the training year. Was the weight higher at the same speed? Was the speed higher at the same weight? Whatever it is, power output's going up. And I think that's more transferable to the field than a true 1 rep max. Now, it's important to be strong for O linemen and D linemen. We do go heavy, but I'd rather do it that way.
Yeah. Do you have, kind of with the VBT in the weight room, is there a cutoff of like developmental type guys that you don't use that with, or do you implement that with pretty much everybody?
No, the freshmen don't use it at all.
Gotcha.
Freshmen don't use it, so it's only the veterans. So when the freshmen come in, I mean, that's bare bones foundational workouts. We got to teach them how to, line up with their toes behind the line first before we can, start throwing Tendo units on them and everything, and teach them and ingrain good techniques. So they don't use them until their first spring with us. So they won't use them all summer and all fall, even through if they redshirt through their developmental workouts. We're just working on technique and just laying the foundation of the program with them.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got Tendos on the way now that we'll be able to start getting to in this kind of extended fall block. But that's something some people have mentioned is like, oh, once, just make sure like once the Tendos go on that you're still focusing on the form. And it's like, that's what we do all the time. Like, duh.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like it makes sense and it's like good to be aware of, but it's like, isn't that what we do every day when we're in the weight room? Like,
exactly. You got to be a technician, and you're going to get what you tolerate. So you just got to coach it out of them regardless.
Yeah. And if a kid hits something that where, oh, that was 0.8, it looked like garbage, do it again, or whatever.
Yep.
So, yeah, for sure. Um, so in talking about some of the speed work and the plyometrics, having because you started younger at LSU and were there for a fair amount of years, do you think being in a position where you get exposed to like super high level athletes early on was valuable in terms of honing in your high intensity field work?
Yeah, our program has really progressed and changed from, my time at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
Two different kind of situations where at LSU you're going to get, some of those 4 and 5 stars that are already coming in and running 4.3s. At a place like Wyoming, it's much more of a developmental program. And so speed needs to be truly developed. It's not always just naturally there. And so at LSU, it was, more of a basic program. We did a lot of different plyometrics, broads, and vertical jumps, different types of sprints. When I got to Wyoming, I realized that it needs to be a little bit more complex, and the field work needs to be developed a little bit more, just because of the type of athletes that we have here. And that's where our field work has really expanded. So, and I can't speak to what Coach Moffitt does right now.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been there in a couple of years now. But we do a little bit different here at Wyoming than we did at LSU.
Yeah,
It just
for sure.
developed a little bit more.
Yeah. I've had that conversation with a couple other people because I started at Nichols in Louisiana, and we had a couple guys who were like 10-4 flat, 100 meters coming out of high school, and it was cool from our experience because it was also like, all right, we already got these studs, but as a young coach, it was fun to dive into like, all right, if we actually want to get these guys any faster, like it has to be super duper dialed in.
Right.
Because taking a kid from whatever 4.80 to 4.65 is probably easier than 4.35 to 4.32.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No
So
doubt.
it was fun as a young coach. Like, all right, if we want to get this kid comes in at 10-4 flat, and he had like Boo Scheck-Snyder as his high school track and field coach. It's like, all right, we got to be locked in to do this.
Right. And especially with those naturally twitchy, a lot of them are fascial driven athletes. You really got to be careful what you do in the weight room too.
Yeah.
And is what you do, whatever you're doing in the weight room, are you deterring from their speed on the field and what makes them what they are? And that's something that has been a large transition for us here is what are the intensities we program for our skill guys versus what are the intensities that we program for our big skill guys. And they've drastically drifted apart in the past year and a half or 2 years now. So yeah, you got to be careful that what you're doing in the weight room isn't deterring from what makes them what they are on the field.
Yeah, that's great. And I've even seen that for myself, and Coach Shadid talked about it moving from like Arkansas State. Now we're at UMass, and like just even in general saying like, oh, this is how I program is almost too dialed in because it's like, oh, that's how I programmed there for that specific situation. Well, but we might have to tweak now for this team. And even as we recruit and our team variables change, it's going to change. And so I asked that question specifically because I knew it was probably going to be your answer too. It was just like,
yeah,
depends on the team. Like,
right. No question.
You get stuck into like, hey, this worked well down there. Even if it has great principles behind it, it might not be appropriate.
Right. Absolutely. Every team, every recruiting class is going to be different. But a lot of it, the guys that come out of high school that are so naturally gifted can still, benefit and make strides because a lot of it's just raw talent. And there's always things to improve, whether it's their running form, whether it's if they're a muscle driven athlete, getting them more elastic or vice versa. There's always something to improve. It's just like you said, fine tuning it with some of those really twitchy guys. You just don't want to take away from what they're naturally good at already.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say were some of like the bigger influences of expanding that like inventory that you talked about of the training, like progression of getting these guys to a higher level with where you're at now?
Yeah, kind of who has influenced me. You know, when I first got down to LSU, Paul Jackson was there. And Paul is one of the best strength coaches or dudes I've ever been around. And I was only there for a semester with him, but you know, I know a lot of his staff, and I kind of started seeing what he was doing when he branched off to Miami of Ohio and Southern Miss and Ole Miss. So that kind of piqued my interest into just delving into more research and educating myself more on a track standpoint. You know, guys like Charlie Francis and Derek Hansen and Franz Bosch, and just educating myself on track and field principles. Because I mean, at the end of the day, track and field athletes are the fastest people on earth. So there's certain principles that you can apply to team sports setting. Are these guys sprinters? No, absolutely not. But there's some broad principles that you can apply to team sports. And so, you know, Paul Jackson's been huge. You know, just seeing how he's run his program piqued my interest into, you know, kind of educating myself on more of the field work. And then from that point, it was taking everything that I've researched and read about and implementing it. And that's kind of what we started to do once we got here to Wyoming in 2018. And it's just been a slow progression of building that program year to year in terms of the speed work and the plyos and all the field work.
Mm-hmm. So I guess shifting focus a little bit from like X's and O's to some broader things. So you became director at Wyoming in, I forget, it was January, December.
Mm-hmm.
But how has your day-to-day kind of focus shifted, if it has at all, since moving into that director role, both from interacting with players and then your staff as well?
Yeah, so, you know, I guess I'll start from when we first got up here. You know, when Ben and I, and Ben is currently the director of strength and conditioning at Kansas, Ben and I had talked about, you know, if either of us ever got an opportunity to branch off and take a head job, you know, would we want to kind of do it as co-directors? And that was something we had talked about for a while. So that was originally how we kind of came up here. Was essentially co-directors where he was more working on the weight room stuff and I basically wrote the field stuff, and then we would come together and kind of make sure everything blended. So transitioning to the director only, it wasn't a huge transition because I had been here for a while in that role. So it wasn't a huge transition. I think the biggest thing was having to do both the weight room and the field and making sure all of that married up, because it wasn't two heads thinking together. Now, of course, I have my staff here and we definitely collaborate and everything, but it wasn't quite the same as when Ben and I did it as co-directors. But I think the biggest thing is when you become director, man, everyone's watching everything you do and you just got to be aware of that. You know, delegating things to my staff, that's difficult for me because truly I'm a control freak and I like to do everything. That's just kind of who I am. So truly delegating, you know, things to my staff, that's been a learning curve for me. And I'm certainly not perfect, but I'm trying to get better at that. But other than that, man, it wasn't too bad of a transition because the foundation had been laid, the culture had been laid. Coach Ben and I had kind of run it simultaneously and concurrently together as co-directors. So instead of two guys, it was essentially just one now.
Yeah, I got you. And when you had to go about filling the openings on your staff, because I know some of the guys went with Ben to Kansas. How do you go about approaching like maybe what you're looking for in different assistants?
Yeah, so my first hire was actually a guy that had been interning with us for about 6 months, and he had done an incredible job. I kind of saw how he had formed relationships with the athletes, and I'm really looking for a personality type in who I'm hiring, and he fit that personality type. He's a hard worker. He was really proactive, and most importantly, he formed really good relationships with the athletes. So he was my first hire. And then from that point, I think it was a pretty normal hiring process of going back to mentors that you've had and accumulating names and guys that have worked in the same programs or similar programs to where you have. One of my hires was Jordan Jarosevich, who interned at LSU. Coach Moffitt spoke highly of him. What I really liked about him was he played tight end at Purdue. So he's been through it. He knows what it's about. He can relate to what the athletes are going through. Another assistant, Colin DeClark, had interned while I was at LSU and showed us that he could be a really good strength coach. And then the other one was Carl Miller, who was really highly recommended through Joey Garasio, who's a good friend of mine, obviously. When that coaching change happened at CSU and Joey dipped to FAU, highly recommended from Joey, who obviously had the utmost respect for and trust. And so that was the hiring process. And it's kind of all just guys that have been within trees that I'm comfortable with, that I know are going to mend well or mold well with this program and fit in, especially with a personality type, and forge relationships with these athletes and make sure we're all on the same page, so we're all speaking one language.
Yeah, for sure. I know one thing that I've even noticed as like going through, and one thing that Shadid does well is like if I'm watching what say Shadid does as director of sports performance and learning from the good things that he's able to put forth, but also making sure that I'm taking notes on like, okay, how would I get that across and do that with my own personality? Because it's almost like you see some people who is just like, oh, I'm gonna just copy that. And it's like, well, wait, you're a different person.
Right.
And so is that, I don't know if that's something, I mean, you were with Coach Moffitt for a while, so I don't know if you had to almost be aware of that, like, okay, what he's doing well, but not just copying. Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. I'm in a total agreement with that. I don't want to hire 4 Eric Donavals on my staff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need that. I want guys that are going to challenge my thought process and do things maybe a slightly different way. At the end of the day, we're all speaking one language, but there's going to be different dialects to that language. And so there's an underlying personality type, and there's an underlying base and philosophy that I'm looking for. But I want guys that are going to be themselves and be authentic. And that's the biggest thing to me with coaching, is being authentic. And being authentic means being real, speaking the truth. And so they don't need to act like me. They need to implement our philosophies and build relationships with these players, how they're comfortable doing it within the culture and the philosophy that we have here at Wyoming.
How do you guys go about, or how do you go about maybe evaluating or assessing your assistants and just even providing feedback to them of where is it that they could improve, or where is it that maybe you'd like to see them develop more?
I think that's a daily process, to be honest with you. And there's formal evaluations that we do, but that's a daily process, and that's part of being a director. If there's something that needs to be fixed, it's my job to address it immediately, and address it and get it fixed. So as a staff, we meet every day after workouts. We discuss the day. If there's anything I thought didn't go well, if there was a setup that needed to be adjusted, if there's any issues that we had that day, it's they kind of get evaluated in real time, because I'm not going to wait for formal evaluation if there's an issue to get fixed. We need to confront that issue and find a solution to that problem immediately. So it's kind of real time evaluations every day with the staff. That's kind of how I kind of roll up here with that.
Yeah.
We've noticed that's something that strength coaches do really well.
Yeah.
Is, even in like maybe in contrast to other positions potentially, of like, if we're making it to your like regular kind of performance eval and there's anything negative still on it, like you're probably just going to be gone.
Yeah.
It's like, cause I told you about it 30 seconds after it happened. And then if it wasn't fixed, it wasn't fixed. And you're not making it to that 6 month eval or whatever.
Exactly. It's got to be done now. And honestly, if it's not fixed, that's on me. As a director, that's my fault. If there's an issue, the responsibility falls on the director. Yeah, the assistants need to pull their weight, but at the end of the day, I'm responsible that everything goes on in that weight room. So if there's a problem, it needs to be confronted, addressed, and a solution needs to be found.
Yeah, for sure. How do you, I guess you touched on it a little bit, like you have trouble in delegating a little bit, but how do you go about like providing enough autonomy that you don't, like you said, you don't want just those yes men, but are there anything you kind of focus on in order to kind of promote those other ideas and maybe criticisms?
Yeah, so I think the important part with that, of what I try to do is give them tasks that are appropriate for where they are on the staff and what their roles are. Now, am I going to tell my assistant to program all the speed work for summer training? No, probably not. I'll program that, and then we'll discuss it as a staff. But for me, it was delegating smaller tasks to kind of build my tolerance for it, because I hated doing it so much. I just like doing things myself, and that's not, it has nothing to do with not trusting my staff or anything. That's just who I am. I trust my staff with everything I got. But it was delegating smaller things. Hey man, I need you to make sure all the workout cards are printed out. I need you to make sure you're in charge of all the setup. Here's what we're doing, get it done. I need you to be in charge of the player profiles. I need you to get the PDFs ready to give to the coaches. So it was kind of me easing myself into giving them tasks. And then I think with any organization, you earn responsibility. So as you kind of do those tasks and prove that you're responsible and proactive and can get stuff done, then you can give them a little bit, bigger tasks to do. But when it came down to the coaching part of it, they were thrown in the fire right away. And especially in these times, it was really unique with the COVID situation, where we had, a group on one end of the stadium, a group on the other end, a group in the IPF, and each assistant would run a group, and then I had a group too. And so there was no way for me to have eyes on everybody. So from a coaching standpoint, they're thrown right in right away. I need guys that are dogs on the platforms. They're going to coach their tails off. But for me, it was just slowly giving them tasks that are appropriate for what their role is, and kind of getting myself used to not doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's like the process of anytime someone takes over like full control, even if it's not their first time being a director, just in general, of like, once I know that these people are high performing at whatever it is that I'm giving them, then eventually, like, I'm sure you'll probably get to the point where you're not even remotely like worried about giving off responsibility. You'll probably look forward to just being like, yeah, this is all yours. Like, I don't even want to deal with it anymore, because I know you can handle it.
Yeah. And that's probably where we're at now. Again, we've been through a whole spring together. We've been through the quarantine. We went through all summer training, and that's pretty much where we're at now. It just took me a little bit of time to get there, just because of how I'm used to operating and working.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit in that same vein, are there any ways that you guys are intentional about fitting in autonomy for the athletes inside of workouts, or maybe that's something that's geared towards a more senior, higher training age type guy? So are there ways you try to fit autonomy in for the athletes?
Yeah, I think that's very individual specific.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain guys that I can trust and say, hey man, how you feeling? And he's like, man, my low back it's killing me. There's other athletes, and I think this is in any program, where you ask them how you're feeling, and they might not give you a truthful answer. So I think it's very individual specific with that kind of stuff. Other than just general conversation with how guys are feeling on a case by case basis, the workouts pretty much are what they are. Now, when it comes to the speed work, I would say that's where the guys have the most autonomy, because it is such a touchy part of the program where if guys truly aren't feeling 100%, kind of a dangerous spot to put them in a 30-yard build with a flying 10. So we are a little bit more precautious with that. A lot of times we'll program, 3 flying 10s, and you'll hit the first one, hit the second one, you have an option of the third one. But other than that, the workouts are pretty much what they are.
Gotcha. Are there ways? I know that you've now been with Coach Bowl since basically 2.5 years. What are ways that you guys collaborate, or Coach Bowl kind of looks to you guys in terms of helping with that sort of load management is the niche term for it now, but basically incorporating your own like expertise about physical loading into the football realm?
Yeah, that's been a huge part of our program here. And this will be kind of a long answer. When we first got here, and if you know anything about Coach Bowles' background, he's an old school guy. He coached at Nebraska back in the heyday. And he wasn't a big fan of GPS when we got here because of how it was implemented prior to when we got here. The biggest thing that I told Coach Bowl was, listen, Coach, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to tell you what you're doing. And so once he heard that, the guard kind of came down. At the end of the day, Coach Bowl wants to put a winning football team on the field. So it was a process. We had switched systems as well. We were Catapult before. We moved to Polar because that's what I was familiar with from LSU. And it was really educating Coach Bowl on what this system does, and then putting it in terms that a football coach would understand. You go up to him and say, hey, well, so-and-so's zone 5 yardage is 130% of where he should be off his average. That's just going to intimidate and put the defenses up with most sport coaches. So it was putting it in terms that he understood, and most importantly, him understanding that I'm not here to tell him what to do. I'm just here to tell him what he's doing. And I think the breakthrough moment was when I met with him in camp of 2018 before the season, and there was 3 guys that we had kind of red flagged. And we kind of say, I mean, these guys loads are pretty high. We just got to watch these 3 guys. And all 3 guys ended up getting a soft tissue that practice. And so I think that's where the buy-in kind of happened. Like, oh, these guys aren't trying to just get guys to not practice. We're just trying to ensure the health and performance of these athletes. And from that point on, it's been a really good relationship where he wants the information. He wants to know where individuals are. I communicate on a daily basis with the sport coaches for their specific position groups based on the numbers that we see. And then from a team standpoint to Coach Bowl, and Coach Bowl's very adaptable. He's a really smart guy. He understands it. And he's made some significant changes towards practice in certain times of the year where I don't know if it necessarily would have been like that 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Is like, we're not trying to tell you what to do. We're just telling you what you are doing. Because I've even seen that with, it's like our coaches are great and bought in, and there are some days where it's like, hey, was that good or bad? And it's only like, hey, it's not good or bad. It just is what it is. And we just need to be aware of it so that tomorrow can contrast or build off of it, or it's almost like the stigma around any sort of data tracking is like, oh, they're just going to tell me to do less.
Right.
And it's on us to figure out and get across that's like, no. In the end, we're trying to just, long term is probably actually chronically do more, but just organize it in a way that gets us to where we want to go.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, the intensity doesn't, fatigue these guys. It's usually the volume. And that was something that we tried to inform Coach Bull about, and we're not telling them to practice easier by any means. When they go step on that field, it's all out, but maybe sometimes the duration of it, or essentially the pitch count or the play count of certain athletes can just slightly be modified so that we come back on a Wednesday and that athlete can still practice to the same output that we want them to.
Yeah. And you kind of like alluded to it, and Coach has been going for a long time. He's been coaching for a while. And I know Joel and I have talked about it, but like the technology of implementing it, and if it's implemented the right way and communicated the right way, it almost speeds up the process of the coach getting to like a more optimal practice design. Because it's like, you look at past coaches who were like legendary, it took them a while to get to a point where like they're not running their team into the ground, and it's like they have these like championship caliber teams. But now it's like, if the technology is communicated the right way, you're setting them up to just like optimize way quicker, as long as they can somewhat understand it.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, it's definitely situational with the type of team you have too. When Coach Bull was taking over this program, they needed 2-hour practices every single day in full pads. That's just where this program was at from a cultural standpoint. Now Coach Bull has the culture completely set here. Those things don't need to be implemented quite as much because that foundation has already been laid. Much different, year 7 than it was year 1 for him.
Yeah. And even like like you said, like sometimes that is what's needed, and it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just, you need to know about it so that you can adjust, and honestly, like adjust around it. Like, it's like,
right.
Hey, can we go whatever? Hey, can we hit a 24 period practice today? Like, is that good or bad? It's like, well, it's not good or bad. It just means like, we might cut our weight room session in half, but that is what it is. You just got to account for it.
Right.
So if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do.
Yeah. And you're going to have those days. It's football. It's a violent, aggressive sport. And you're going to have those days where you need to ground and pound these dudes, and they need to bang, and they need to get ready to hit. You just got to understand in the scheme of the week, what we did, and then where do we move forward from there to not put them at a deficit going into game day on Saturdays.
Mm-hmm. And how do you guys, I guess, kind of segues right into it, specifically in the season, how do you go about, maybe undulating or adjusting for that, what we just talked about, like that daily practice load from a weight room standpoint?
Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of talk about the GPS to kind of segue into that.
Mm-hmm.
From a GPS standpoint, we have all the data from the past, 2 camps and 2 seasons. So we know exactly what a 12 period, 15, 18, 21, 24 average practice looks like. And then we have each individual, what their average 12, 15, 18, 21, 24 period practice looks like. And so we have all those averages. So from a team standpoint, we could say, compared to last year or compared to an average 15 period practice, we are at 105% of where our average is. Okay. So we're probably okay with that. And then we can do the same thing from an individual standpoint. And then within those team averages and individual averages, we look at physiological load, mechanical load, total load, zone 4 and zone 5, high intensity running for the majority of the skill guys. And then average heart rate, which kind of plays into the physiological load anyway. So, we can give them pretty specific information. Player A is at 140% of what his 15 period practice is. Anything over 130%, we kind of say, he's a little high. So we can communicate that information to the sport coaches, and so they know exactly where each player is. And then on the flip side, we don't want to sit here and have sport coaches pull back on individuals and then us just go heavy in the weight room. So, it's a double, or it's a dual-headed monster there. We'll obviously either heighten the velocity range that we're in that day, so the weight's going to be a little bit lighter. We'll lower reps, we'll lower intensities, whatever we need to do to take the load off those guys. We'll do our part in the weight room as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's a That's a great point where you can almost fall into like, oh, he sat out practice, or not sat out, but like, hey, he had a lighter practice, so he feels great now at the back end of the day. But like, hey, we're still gonna make sure you don't, blow your load on Thursday afternoon when
Yes,
we know what the end goal is.
exactly. And there's been times during the season where we've had to change lifts to just true recovery sessions. And I think that's just part of adaptation during the season, and adapting to where these guys are at. It is what it is with where they are. So if we need to pull back in the weight room, then by all means, we're going to do that to make sure that they're at peak performance on Saturdays.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess too with the polar, you get heart. I know you get the internal data as well as the external data. How do you guys? And I know you've worked with it for a long time. What sort of maybe structures do you put in place so that, I mean, because that could end up being a lot of data. Like, how do
Yeah.
you go about organizing it so you aren't losing, kind of the forest for the trees?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just not having paralysis by analysis. It's going to give you a lot of variables. So we really focus on the meat and potatoes. I almost look at it like a diet. Like we're going to focus on protein, carbs, and fat. We're going to worry about vitamin K and vitamin A. We're not going to worry about all those small things because you are just going to overanalyze things, and you might even end up finding problems that aren't even actually there. So we look at yardage. Like I said, we look at physiological and mechanical load, and mechanical load is comprised of all the high and very high accelerations and decelerations. So that kind of gives us our mechanical and then our total load. And then for the skill guys, we look at zone 4 and zone 5 yardage. So our zone 4 is 12 to 16 and our zone 5 is 16 plus. And that's really, and their top speed miles per hour. Which can be tricky sometimes because you get those glitches and stuff. So those are the main things that we look at. And then the biggest thing was for us from a GPS standpoint was deconstructing what they do in camp and making sure that we periodize our summer and undulate it so we are reaching, I like to be within 10% of what they're doing for a full week of camp. And so like for the skill guys, and I actually got it pulled up. Skill guys on their heaviest week of camp, they had about 1,900 yards of zone 4, about 650 of zone 5, 1,000 P load, 820 M load. And so we know exactly what 1 week of camp looks like on those main variables. So we can periodize and undulate all of our work through the summer to make sure that we're exposing them to the demands that they're going to have during that highest week of camp. And that's been huge for us, is quantifying what these guys are going to actually do Monday through Saturday for a full week camp, and making sure that we're exposing them to those demands. And that's been huge for us in terms of the soft tissue injuries have drastically decreased. We went from 19 hamstrings the year before we got here to we had 1 hamstring tendon inflammation last year during camp, and that was it. So that's been huge, deconstructing and then using those main variables to make sure we're exposing these guys to what they're doing. But from a in-season standpoint, we look at those main variables, and it's really kind of a acute to chronic ratio with the load and the zone 4 and zone 5 yardage. Like I said, once guys get past 130%, they're kind of in that in danger range or warning range, that yellow flag right there. So we kind of flag those guys. But we just use those main variables, and really my staff's been incredible. They're a lot better at Excel than I am. Carl Miller's a wizard with Excel, so he's got all these like pivot tables, and I don't even know what a pivot table is, but it looks cool and it makes sense to me. But he knows how to do all that, and so they've done an incredible job, kind of dissecting all the information and putting it in visuals that coaches can understand.
Yeah, that's great. And I even like how you're using, making sure you're quantifying what are the demands for your team,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody can, an average play is 3 to 7 seconds, and the average player gets this and this and this, but that's based off of a big pool of teams.
Mm-hmm.
And if our team took your guys' data and programmed our summer off of it, it would be inappropriate.
For sure.
And vice versa. So if we're able to say, with our catapult, we're say, okay, this is what we do during camp. We got to get our guys ready for that. And, again, it goes back into like it's not necessarily right versus wrong. It's just like what's appropriate for your situation where you're at.
Right. Exactly. At the end of the day, we want to prepare these guys for the rigors that they're going to actually do on the field. And to quantify that, it's going to look different everywhere. It looked different at LSU than it does up here. The practice structure is different everywhere you go. And then within that, it was important for us to quantify, what the skill guys do compared to what the big skill do. Obviously, very different demands, very different training methods. So that's been really, really good for us to allow us to hone our training in and adapt to what we need to get them exposed to for camp.
Yeah, that's great. And even I know it was cool to like pass on to our coaches. We did similar analyses of like we split it up like 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 period practices, and then looking at what percent of a game that was. And so we were able to look and say like it ended up actually falling into basically 80, 70, 60, 50, 40% of a game. And it was like, all right, cool. Like that's pretty much what we were looking for. And it almost gave us not ammunition because everybody was already on board, but it was like the nice little feedback of like, hey, planning ahead of time. If you plan ahead of time, the technology just basically gets to confirm for you.
Right. It just validates everything. Validates 100%.
As opposed to just like, all right, yeah, let's do whatever. And then you come back and you're like, that was too much, or, or that was way too little or whatever.
Right.
Because it was cool to, punch in all the numbers and be like, if a 20 period practice had rolled out as 145% of a game, it would have been like, ooh, maybe not. But goes to show the value of planning ahead of time. And then, not just using the technology as a crutch, but as like a little bit of a helper.
Right. And some of the best meetings I have and what I look forward to is when I get to go up there and be like, yo, coach, everyone looks great. I mean, we nailed it. Speeds are good, loads in range. I mean, let's roll. Those are the best meetings.
Yeah, for sure. And even, early on, it ends up being a little more like, yeah, this metric, we're looking for this. But then you're right. Later on, it can just be like, yeah, we're fine. Do whatever you want. Like,
right.
So those are the good ones. Those are the good ones to get to for sure.
Yep.
Cool. Sweet. I mean, we're through all our questions, and we ended up rolling. We're at about an hour, so this would be
good conversation, man.
Solid. Yeah, for sure. We can just do like a clean ending, and we can just so we can edit it, and then we'll stop recording, and then we can keep chatting. So.
Cool.
Cool. All right, Coach. We really appreciate you coming on and doing this. Great chat that veered way off from our questions, but those end up always being the best ones. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Appreciate you guys having me on, man. I have a lot of respect for what you guys do up there at UMass, man. I'm excited to see you guys get on the field whenever that's going to be, but I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks, Coach.